Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing a fun technique that is an oldie but a goodie using our embossing powders with our embossing folders. I've got a couple of cards to share with you today. The first card that I'm going to make is using this classic diamonds embossing folder from Crafter's Companion. And I'm going to be using it with some teal cardstock and some polished gold embossing powder. Now, on an embossing folder, you've got a raised side and a debossed side. So depending on which side you want, depends on which side we're going to add the embossing ink. But first of all, I'm going to emboss my panel of cardstock, and then I'll be able to show you both sides of the card. Now, you can use the embossing ink directly to the embossing folder. However, because this is a 3D embossing folder with lots of multi-layers, it's going to work a lot better if we emboss it first by dry embossing it, and then we can add our embossing ink. So this is the gorgeous effect that this embossing folder gives. So that's the embossed side, and then the other side is the debossed side, and both are absolutely stunning. Both would give you a slightly different effect, but we're going to use the raised side today, so the embossed side. And I'm just going to swipe my embossing ink pad over the top of the cardstock. And you can just see there in the camera shot, the colour that's catching the ink is slightly darkening. So you can see where the embossing ink is going on those raised bits. Now, because there are multi-levels to this embossing folder, I'm not just going to have caught the triangles that are raised, the smaller ones, but I'll have also have caught some of the bigger ones as well. But it gives a really gorgeous effect. So I'm using the polished gold embossing powder, which is really gorgeous. And I'm just going to pour that all over the panel. You can see areas that I've missed. So again, I'm just going to keep scooping up some more powder, making sure that I've covered all of those raised triangles. I'm giving it a good tap on the back because I don't want the powder to have stuck to some of the debossed areas that obviously we didn't get the embossing ink in. And then once we've done that, we can go ahead and put the powder back in the pot. So although you feel like you're covering a large area, you're really not using that much embossing powder at all. So I'm going to heat set it on the hottest setting using my heat tool from underneath so that we don't blow any of that powder anywhere. And I absolutely love watching the embossing powder melt, especially when it's sped up like this. It just looks so pretty. And you can see the polished gold gives a really lovely, shiny, smooth effect. So yeah, I just think that background looks really gorgeous. So we're going to turn that into a card a little bit later on, but I'm just going to show you another way of using this technique, but with a different embossing folder. So this is a 2D embossing folder. It's from Concord and 9th, and because it's 2D, you've not got all that multi-layer dimension that the 3D embossing folders give. So this technique works really well with 2D embossing folders. Again, you've got a raised side and a smooth side, and we're going to add embossing ink directly to the raised side of the embossing folder. So I'm just swiping my ink pad across the raised areas on that embossing folder, and then we'll be able to go ahead and pop our cardstock straight inside that embossing folder. And you want to make sure that when you close the embossing folder, the card doesn't move at all. You don't want to end up with embossing ink anywhere else other than those debossed areas that we're going to get. So the raised section of a 2D folder is going to give a debossed impression, and that's the side that we're going to be working on for this second panel. So I'm just going to bring in a scrap of paper again, and this time I'm going to use the Speckled turquoise embossing powder. This is a translucent embossing powder, but it's a pearlescent one as well. So it's got a lovely shiny finish that is pearlescent. It's got lots of mixtures of turquoise and teals in, and it's a really pretty powder. Again, I'm going to heat set that from underneath, but before we do, because we've added the embossing powder to the debossed area, I'm able to take a scrap of card and just swipe it along the card panel. And that way I'm able to remove any of the powder that's on the more raised sections of the card. So it keeps it nice and neat, and it makes sure that the powder's just in all of those grooves. If you swipe a bit too hard and you wipe off some of the other powder, you can go ahead and add it back on, as I did then. But then we can heat set it from underneath, and as it heat sets, you can see the colour starting to show through as with the embossing powder. Initially on the camera it looked like there wasn't really a lot of powder there, but as we heat set the panel you can really see that powder. And this is just a really fun way of using your embossing folders on the reverse side and adding embossing powder to those grooves. So let's turn these into cards, and first of all I'm going to make a 5x7 card for this panel. So I've cut a matte black layer to 4.5 inches by 6.5, and then I'm trimming down the gold panel to 6.25 by 4.25, and that's going to be a really nice matte layer on our card. I've got this sentiment die from Concord and Ninth that says "You're so very kind," but I think I needed a bit more contrast than using the same teal card. So I've die cut it again on a scrap of white cardstock, and I'm just going to add some liquid glue and stick that down. I'm using the Barely Arts liquid glue again today, and I'm just going to make sure that all those layers stick nice and firmly with the glue before we go ahead and stick it to our card panel. I'm then able to just add some foam squares to the back of the sentiment and pop that down on the centre of our card. And then to finish it off, I'm just going to use a few flat backed sequins from A Colourful Life Designs in matte black and use my wax pencil just to place those. And I just think that looks really, really gorgeous. I love how the gold pops on the teal, and you've got that lovely bold black border as well. So for the second card on this panel, I've already trimmed it down off camera to 3.75 inches by 5, and I'm just going to add some foam tape to the back of it. This is foam tape from scrapbook.com. I'm almost out of it, so I'm really trying to make sure that I trim it down and get the most out of the extra wide tape. Again, I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid glue just so that I've got a little bit of wiggle room and I can get that nice and straight on my card blank. And this is going to be an A2 card. I've got a scrap of navy blue cardstock that measures 2 inches by 3.75, and then just a thin strip of holographic card to finish that off. I'm going to add a few little die cuts from the Concord and Ninth die set. This is the afternoon tea die set, and I'm just going to add a sentiment in some holographic cardstock as well. I did the die cutting and the assembling off camera because obviously I want the focus to be on the embossing, but it's just a really nice way of showing you how you can finish off those embossed panels, turn them into beautiful backgrounds on your cards as well, and it just really finished off the card really nicely, I thought. So I'm just going to add a die cut flower to the centre of that teapot, and then I'm going to pop a flat back enamel white dot to the centre of that flower. I've had these in my stash for a while, so I've added a little bit of liquid glue as well. And then that is the second card finished for today. So thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that this tutorial has given you some inspiration of ways to use your embossing powders with your embossing folders. I think it is a really good technique. It's a way of extending the use of your powders and your embossing folders. It is an oldie but a goodie, and I think sometimes going back to some of those basic techniques really gives us the inspiration with our card making. So as always, all the products that I've used will be linked in the description box below. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed this tutorial, and please consider subscribing if you're not already. Leave me a comment below as well and let me know which is your favourite card today, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.